I remember that night like it was yesterday. It was one of those eerie autumn evenings when the wind howled through the trees, casting long shadows that danced across the living room. My parents had left me home alone, promising it would be a quick date night. They had left me with a stern warning: don't open the door for anyone, no matter what. I didn't think much of it at first. I was content, sitting on the couch, engrossed in my video game. The virtual world provided a welcome distraction from the silence of the house. But then, out of nowhere, a sharp knock echoed through the quiet rooms. I froze, controller slipping from my hand, and my heart raced. The words my dad had drilled into my head resurfaced. Don't open the door for anyone. I swallowed hard, my imagination running wild with all sorts of horrifying scenarios. Ignoring the knock, I decided to head to the kitchen to grab a snack, trying to shake off the unease creeping up on me. I checked my phone, hoping for a text from my friends to alleviate the solitude. To my delight, there were messages from my buddies asking if they could come over to play the game together. I quickly replied, telling them they were more than welcome. The prospect of company made me feel safer. Before long, my friends arrived, and we dove headfirst into the game. Laughter and the sounds of animated battle filled the living room, momentarily pushing the earlier dread to the back of my mind. We were having a great time, and for a while, I almost forgot about the knock on the door. But then, just when we were engrossed in an intense match, it happened again. A slow, deliberate knock, like knuckles rapping on a coffin. My friends exchanged uneasy glances, and one of them, Tommy, said, "I'll get it. Maybe it's a delivery or something." My heart raced as I shot up from the couch, grabbing Tommy's arm. "No, don't," I urged, my voice trembling. "My parents told me not to open the door for anyone. We have to be careful." Tommy raised an eyebrow but hesitated, seemingly sensing the urgency in my voice. Instead, I tiptoed toward the door, trying to be as discreet as possible. My friends followed closely behind, curiosity mixed with apprehension. I peered through the peephole, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing on the porch, was a man in a dark hood, obscuring his face. His presence sent shivers down my spine, and I immediately backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. It's some weird guy in a hood," I whispered to my friends. Their faces paled as they exchanged anxious glances. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, and the only sound was the distant wind howling outside. "What do we do?" Alyssa asked, her voice quivering. I glanced at the door, my mind racing. My parents had told me not to open it, and I wasn't about to disobey them. "We wait," I replied in a hushed tone, "and hope he goes away." We huddled together, the dread in the room palpable. The stranger continued to stand there, his presence a dark omen that seemed to loom over us. We could only hope that he would give up and leave us in peace. Minutes felt like hours, and the night grew darker and more sinister by the minute. As we huddled together in the dimly lit living room, the tension in the air grew unbearable. The stranger in the hood hadn't moved from the front door, and the darkness outside seemed to press against the windows like a heavy blanket. Just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. There was another knock, louder and more insistent this time. The blood in my veins turned to ice as I heard the voice, low and sinister, whisper through the door. "I know you're in there, Greg. Your dad asked me to come check on you." Tommy, always the bold one in our group, turned to me and said, "Greg, maybe your dad did ask this guy to come. You should open the door and find out." I hesitated, my mind racing. It was true that my dad sometimes had friends check on me when they went out, but something about this situation didn't feel right. A chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't ignore the warning in my gut. "Alyssa," the voice of reason chimed in. "Greg, why don't you call your mom and ask her? She'll know if your dad sent someone over." That seemed like a sensible idea. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom's number. My heart pounded with fear as the phone rang, and then, to my horror, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The man in the hood had moved from the front door and was now standing outside the window, staring at us through the blinds. I gasped, my voice catching in my throat, and I jumped up from the couch, dropping my phone in the process. The call was abruptly ended, and I realized I hadn't even reached my mom. The man in the hood didn't waste any time. He reached for the doorknob and began to turn it, trying to force his way inside. Panic swept through me, and I knew I had to act fast. As the terror intensified, My friends and I scattered in different directions throughout the house, desperately seeking places to hide. The darkness inside seemed to close in around me, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Panic consumed me as I realized that the man had somehow gotten inside. Amidst the chaos, I heard Jimmy, the heavier one in our group, cry out in pain. The agonized sound sent a chill down my spine, and I began to wonder what horrors were unfolding around me. My thoughts raced, and I couldn't help but think, am I going to be next? Suddenly, Alyssa's voice pierced through the darkness. "I'm over here," she shouted. My heart sank as I wondered why she would draw attention to herself. Was she trying to be a hero? Or was fear clouding her judgment? The hooded man seemed to take the bait, moving toward Alyssa's direction. I couldn't see what was happening, but I heard a shattering noise and Alyssa's triumphant scream. She had thrown a glass bottle at the intruder, but I couldn't tell if she had incapacitated him or not. Without waiting to find out, the rest of us bolted from our hiding spots and rushed toward the front door, determined to escape this nightmare. But as we reached the door and began knocking frantically, our hopes were dashed. The man's voice echoed from inside the house, chilling me to the bone. "My dad tells me not to open the door," he mimicked, his voice dripping with malevolence. Outside, one of our neighbors had finally called the police in response to the commotion. We could hear sirens approaching, but it was too late. By the time the police arrived and entered the house, there was no sign of the hooded man or Alyssa. He had left with her, leaving us with more questions than answers and a haunting sense of dread that would linger long after that fateful night. I can still remember the excitement bubbling inside me as I stepped out of my mom's car and onto the gravel driveway of the cabin in the woods. It was the beginning of summer, and I was going to spend it with my dad in a place far away from the city. My parents had divorced a few years ago, and this was the first summer I'd be spending with my dad in a long time. The cabin was nestled deep in the forest, surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to reach the sky. It was a cozy wooden retreat, complete with a porch that overlooked a serene lake. The moment I saw my dad's familiar grin, I knew this was going to be a summer I'd never forget. The first few days were filled with fishing, hiking, and all the outdoor adventures I had missed out on during the school year. My dad and I laughed and bonded like we used to, and I began to feel like a kid again. But things started to change on the third night. I woke up in the middle of the night, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the bedroom. As I blinked away the sleep, I noticed something strange. My dad was standing at the foot of my bed, just staring at me. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. Maybe he had come to check on me, I thought. The next day, my unease grew. Dad seemed different, distant. He would follow me around the cabin, always watching me, even when I was playing outside by myself. It was as if he was studying me, like I was some kind of puzzle he needed to solve. That night, the strangeness reached a new level. I woke up again, and this time I was sure I hadn't imagined it. My dad was leaning over me, his face inches from mine. Panic surged through me, and I gasped, causing him to jump back in surprise. He muttered something about checking if I was okay and hurried out of the room. I knew something was terribly wrong, and I had to talk to my mom about it. I grabbed my phone, silently slipping out of bed, and tiptoed down the hallway. I was about to dial my mom's number when I heard a creak behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned around, and there was my dad, looming in the darkness. Before I could react, he snatched the phone from my hand and shoved me into a room I hadn't even noticed before. The basement. The door slammed shut, and I was plunged into darkness. I fumbled around, desperately searching for a way out. My dad's strange behavior had escalated into something horrifying, and I needed to escape. I felt my way along the cold, damp walls, and eventually, I found a small window. I pushed it open and squeezed through, scraping my arms and legs in the process. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted through the thick forest, my breaths coming out in ragged gasps. The moonlight filtered through the towering trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Panic coursed through my veins as I glanced back and saw the cabin door slowly creaking open. What I saw emerging from that doorway couldn't possibly be my dad. It had his shape, his familiar silhouette, but the face was twisted, contorted into an inhumanly wide smile, revealing rows of serrated teeth. My blood ran cold as I realized that this couldn't be my father. It was something else, something monstrous wearing his form. Without a moment's hesitation, the nightmarish figure lunged from the door, covering the distance between us in a terrifyingly quick burst of speed. My legs ached, and my lungs burned as I pushed myself harder, but I could hear the unearthly sound of its laughter echoing behind me. I knew I couldn't outrun this abomination for long, so I veered off the trail and into the underbrush, hoping to lose it in the dense foliage. I crouched down, trying to control my frantic breaths. The night was silent, save for the distant rustling of leaves. But then, as I hid, I felt it, warm, wet breath on the back of my neck. My heart leaped into my throat, and I slowly turned around. There it was, the monstrous version of my father, its grotesque smile inches from my face. It had found me. With a guttural growl, it grabbed me by the arm, its grip like a vice. I struggled, but its strength was inhuman, and it dragged me back toward the cabin. My mind raced with fear, confusion, and disbelief. What had happened to my dad? What was this thing that wore his skin? As we reached the cabin, I was thrown inside, and my eyes widened in horror as I saw my real dad, bound and gagged, lying on the floor. His eyes were filled with a desperate plea for help, but he couldn't speak. The monstrous doppelganger of my father grinned even wider, its serrated teeth glinting in the dim light. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was next. Whatever had taken my dad's place was not here for a family reunion. It was here for something much darker and more sinister. As it approached me, its malevolent gaze locked onto mine. I knew that I was trapped in a nightmarish reality, with no way of knowing what would happen next. The night had taken a dark turn after a raucous evening with my friends at the bar. Drunken laughter still echoed in my ears as I staggered towards the curb, summoning an Uber to take me home. A sinister chill ran down my spine when the driver pulled up. His eyes were not just black, they were like empty voids absorbing any light that dared approach. I brushed it off, thinking it was a trick of the dimly lit streets. As I climbed into the back seat, the driver's chilling presence sent shivers down my spine. The car's interior seemed to grow colder with every passing second, and a creeping sense of dread settled over me like a heavy shroud. I struggled to maintain my composure, telling myself that it was just my inebriated mind playing tricks on me. The journey began in an eerie silence, punctuated only by the low hum of the engine. The cityscape outside the car started to warp and distort, as though it were undergoing a nightmarish transformation. Streetlights contorted into grotesque, skeletal trees, and buildings twisted into monstrous, leering facades. Panic welled up within me, and I fumbled with the door handle, but it remained steadfastly locked, denying my escape. My unease deepened as the driver made periodic stops along the way. Each time he would step out of the car and approach shadowy, writhing figures that seemed to emerge from the very darkness itself. Through the window, I was forced to witness the gruesome and gory spectacle that unfolded before me. The driver, with his coal-black eyes, showed no mercy as he mercilessly slaughtered these tormented souls. Blood splattered against the glass, and the anguished screams of his victims reverberated through the car's interior. It was a horrifying tableau that defied all reason, leaving me paralyzed with fear. The journey seemed to stretch on for an eternity, and the landscape outside grew increasingly surreal. It was as if we were traveling through the darkest, most nightmarish recesses of hell itself. Fire rained down from the sky, illuminating a desolate, fiery wasteland. Red mountains loomed on the horizon, their peaks resembling jagged teeth. The air was thick with the agonized moans of tortured souls, creating a deafening cacophony of despair that clawed at my sanity. Finally, the car came to a halt at a destination that defied description. It was a place that could only be likened to the very depths of hell. The driver turned to me, his black eyes fixing me in a gaze that sent shivers down my spine. His voice when he spoke was chilling and malevolent. "I need to be paid with your soul." Trembling with fear and desperation, I knew I had no choice but to comply. I reluctantly agreed, offering up the sole of my shoe as payment. The demon examined it briefly before letting out a dark, ominous chuckle. "Clever," he said, acknowledging my feeble attempt at trickery. With that, he returned to the driver's seat, and the car sped away from the nightmarish realm we had descended into. I watched in stunned silence as the horrifying landscape slowly faded away, replaced by the familiar city streets. As I stumbled out of the car and onto the sidewalk, I knew that I had experienced a nightmarish journey unlike anything I could have ever imagined. The memory of those pitch-black eyes and the gruesome horrors I had witnessed would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my days. I had narrowly escaped the clutches of a demon who had taken me on a ride to damnation, and I vowed that I would never take an Uber again, forever scarred by the horrific ordeal that had transcended the boundaries of reality.